The Galien Foundation fosters, recognizes, and rewards excellence in scientific innovation to improve the human condition.
André Malraux said once in one of his novels, "Une vie humaine ne vaut rien, mais rien ne vaut une vie humaine." Human life is worth nothing, but nothing is worth a human life. All these men and women are trying to save human lives. Is there anything more noble than that?
Around the globe, the Prix Galien is considered as the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for the industry mobilizing an unrivaled network of Nobel laureates and top biomedical scientists. The Galien Foundation manages an independent, cross-functional, and geographically diverse program of events and sponsorship to brand the best of the best in new medicines and diagnostics. The Prix Galien is a welcome initiative to stimulate creative research and promote excellence. Barack Obama. The Galien Awards ceremony is considered the equivalent of the Oscars night for the innovators in the labs and awards every year the best pharmaceutical product, the best biotechnology product, the best medical technology, and the best digital health product. The Roy Vagelos Pro Bono Humanum Award for Global Health Equity is bestowed to an individual, a company, an academic institution, or a non-governmental agency that has helped to improve the human condition through the application of biopharmaceutical science to problems of developing or underserved populations worldwide.
This is the right event, on the right issue, at the right time.
I thank His Excellency, the President, for bringing Prix Galien to Africa, and I look forward to the day when we will celebrate an African winner of the Prix Galien.
I'm particularly grateful to receive this award.
The awards are among the highest honors in science and commerce because they lead to improvement in the human condition.
The Prix Galien Awards recognize the world's brightest minds and most innovative companies. They are a true celebration of the hard work required to produce life-changing interventions.
That is what makes us optimistic about the future.
Congratulations to all of you.
Make a difference. Join the Galien Foundation. And now, welcome to the Galien Digital Health Webinar Series.
Welcome everyone to today's breakthrough conversation on life science innovation. I'm Gil Bash. I'm your moderator and host for today, and I am going to be leading us in a conversation that I think will be illuminating for all of you. How can an industry that has demonstrated such ability to invent and bring from the clinic to your arm life-saving vaccines and new technologies sustain our well-being? We need to nurture bold ideas. How do we best support innovation that can improve the human condition? That's the mission of the Galien Foundation, to acknowledge and find those ideas and championing them. A startup grows in an incubator where well-equipped research labs and other facilities are provided, and matures in an environment where mentorship and networking and venture capital transform the concept into something meaningful that can sustain and save lives. Entrepreneurs approach an accelerator and innovator for funding, but more importantly, for guidance in the form of project management, business development, market readiness. They seek to find a home that will nurture ideas and bring them from concept into the future. Today, we're going to hear from 4 outstanding, renowned leaders who are at the cutting edge of bringing ideas forward to improve our health, innovation that can improve the human condition. Before we begin, my thanks to Bruno Cohen, the Secretary General of the Galien Foundation, and to the Foundation staff who have made these programs possible. I just want to stop for a moment before we begin and share with you a polling question. You'll respond to the question, and at the end of our hour together, you're going to have a chance to see what almost 400 people who are participating in this program shared. Take a few seconds, take your choice. Obviously, we'll share the answers on social media as well. Well, thank you for that. Now, I said we had a world-renowned panel. You're going to hear exactly what I'm talking about. Let me introduce them in alphabetical order, and then we're going to leap into conversation together. First, Jeff Balzer. Jeff is Dean of the Vanderbilt University School of Medicine. He's also President and CEO of the Vanderbilt University Medical Center. He's an elected member to the National Academy of Medicine. Jeff is passionate about patient care, passionate about harnessing bold ideas and innovation that can help sustain people's lives. How many people may walk through the doors of Vanderbilt every year? Believe it or not, it's more than 2.5 unique patient visits, each one unique. How is Jeff and his team making a difference? They're bringing aboard innovations that include integrating health informatics, personalized medicine, and precision genomics. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. Next, Dr. Michelle Longmire. Michelle is a Stanford-trained physician. She's an entrepreneur. She's driven to improve human health through advances in technology. She founded a breakthrough company called Medable in 2015. And she recognized that there was a need to reinvent, to accelerate, to expand how we involve patients in drug development. And it meant looking at new technologies, new ideas, new ways of working with industry, new ways of industry working with patients and third-party organizations. Totally different. She's doing that by advancing both clinical trials and digital technologies. And then COVID-19 swept the world, and we recognized everything had changed. Michelle is really one of the great change agents of drug development. And she's authored, by the way, 20 peer-reviewed articles. She's a leader in the application of technology for the life science and healthcare industry. I might also add, she's been a sort of a semi-professional soccer player. And I think in her career, she was even a dirt bike racer. So when it comes to doing anything sort of extreme sports, extreme science, we can count on Michelle adding her voice. I hope I haven't overplayed that, Michelle, but I think it's true. Lisa Prasad.
I love it.
Okay, good. Lisa Prasad. I met Lisa actually not in Detroit, where I'm often visiting before COVID. I met her on a stage in Tel Aviv, Israel. Lisa is the Chief Innovation Officer at the Henry Ford Health System in Michigan. And as I mentioned before COVID, we would bump into each other someplace around the globe on a stage. Lisa is a hands-on, roll up your sleeves scout for innovation that can improve the human condition. At Henry Ford Health System, she is the lead executive championing technology development, corporate and business and product development, and domestic and international commercialization agendas and ventures. But more than that, she's accessible, she's a great mentor, and she really goes out of her way to tap into people who can improve our existence. Henry Ford Health System is a role model example of an accelerator and a center of incubation. We have with us also Eyal Zimlach, and Eyal is the Chief Medical Officer and Chief Innovation Officer at Sheba Medical Center. That's Israel's largest hospital. And by the way, Eyal, congratulations. I think it was 2 weeks ago, Newsweek named Sheba Medical Center one of the 13 global health innovators in the world, the top innovators in the world. And I know that you and your team have played a large role in that. Now at Sheba, obviously Eyal has many different responsibilities. He's, first of all, comes from internal medicine. He is, as I mentioned, Chief Medical Officer. He does see patients, as do many of the physicians participating today. But actually, he too is traveling the world. He is building essentially centers of innovation, incubation, excellence all over the world. I know, Eyal, I think a few weeks ago you were in Chicago. We had the pleasure of having coffee in New Jersey, where I know you're looking at placing an ARC Innovation Center, ARC standing for Accelerate, Redesign, Collaborate. And I think you're also looking at Asia. I think you're looking at Australia and probably Africa. You're a globalist. You understand that great ideas happen from everywhere. Welcome to our panelists today. So I just want to start us off with a question, a warm-up question. And many of you have worked together before. So I'm just curious. And let me start with Lisa and Eyal. If you don't mind, I'll bop over to you and then on to Michelle and Jeff. So this passion for innovation started somehow, someplace. There's so much urgency for people who are entrepreneurs. They're seeking, all sorts of help. But I wanted to know, when we look at digital health and medical device and all these technologies, two-part question. One, what made you decide to jump in and be, in essence, the incubator, accelerator, the support system for innovation that can improve human life? And what excites you about this field? Lisa, tell us.
Oh, thank you, Gil, and thank you so much for having me as part of this august panel. It's really exciting to be here. And this is a really personal question. I know my colleagues, Eyal, Michelle, and Jeff are all medical doctors, so I imagine that they will have the unique passions that physicians do bring to the art and science of healing. My personal passion is around how innovation can drive growth in our communities. So I look at my work through two lenses: population health and economic development. And I am here based in Detroit, and many people may not know that, but Detroit is sort of the epicenter of a post-industrial city that's been left behind in a lot of economic growth. So from population health perspective, data shows us that there's economic value in good health. In Detroit, we are not gaining that economic value. Poor health here has led to lower income, it's led to reduced education levels and increased poverty. And we are a part of the petri dish where I think these disparities really exist and they're on display. We know that practical applications of innovation can improve the health of the population. So I'm very passionate about technologies that can help us combat disease, chronic disease, provide better access and better preventive care, and promote meaningful engagement with our patients. On the economic development front, the future of our economy really does lie in high-tech innovation. And Henry Ford is a major anchor in Detroit, and we have the ability to leverage our innovations to attract business to our region, as well as attract talent and capital. The innovation sector has created significant wealth in places like Boston and San Francisco and New York. And in fact, Israel, where Eyal is the head of a major economic anchor there, then perhaps he'll touch on that. Israel is a startup nation and a shining example of what innovation can do to the economic health of a region. So going back to my passion, I'm excited every day to drive innovations that can create growth for our regional economy and uplift individuals' lives at the same time.
That's fantastic. Eyal, you want to pick up on that? I know you and Lisa have been in the same conference room prior to COVID. What drives you into the field? What excites you?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me for this prestigious event. My origins, apart from being a doctor, are in healthcare quality and patient safety. I've been the chief quality officer here before. I've spent many years in Boston working around quality and patient safety at Partners Healthcare. And, understanding that we have huge gaps in healthcare, because anybody that deals with quality and patient safety, I typically view it as looking at the empty half glass. Medicine is doing such fantastic things, and some of us are tending to focus on the good stuff, while I get phone calls in the middle of the night as chief quality and now chief medical officer when a patient is harmed. And so we fight through trying to find solutions to the breakdowns in healthcare. And we understand that healthcare is far, far from perfect. We've been at this issue for more than 20 years, since To Err Is Human came out in 1999. And even previous to that, with some of the publications coming out of Harvard, knowing how much we're hurting patients, how much we're providing subpar quality. So to find solutions to these problems that we haven't figured out so far in the past 20 plus years, we have to go to innovation. We have to think differently. We have to redesign. And that's what ARC is all about. This, what drew me in. I was talking a lot about this with other chief quality officers, and there seems to be this wave coming around right now of people transitioning from quality to innovation. Again, people from quality, I think, see the problems at a better sight. And that's where my passion is coming from, trying to solve the major problems that the healthcare sector has. And to do that, we've built ARC. We're partnering with the best in breed around the world, like Henry Ford, and our work with Lisa and her team is really on almost a day-to-day basis, and with some of the other centers around the world. And this is the only way to try and solve this. We cannot do this alone. We have to work together.
Yeah. You know, Eyal, I want to pick up on what you said and swing over to Michelle for a moment, because Michelle, obviously, like yourself and Lisa, has worked in a major medical system. Stanford obviously is considered a very edgy medical system. And then Michelle, you went off and said, you know what? I'm going to accelerate. I'm going to redesign. I'm going to collaborate. To Eyal's point, ARC, and you went off and created 6 years ago Medable. And obviously today it's a force, but it wasn't a force in 2015. It was a concept. What happened from the concept moment to the force concept? I'd be curious to know what got you into sort of saying, I'm not going to be in the practice of medicine like this. I'm going to be in the practice of medicine like Medable. What was the catalyst for that?
Sure. I think, one of the common threads among this group is the belief that, this understanding we have of the intersection of technology and healthcare can be a driving force for improvements and change, and ultimately the betterment of people and patients' lives. So, at Stanford, I was very fortunate to be, in an apartment and in a research lab that had a big impact on patients' lives. But really, I realized that, for me as an individual, to build a company and a team that really tackled access to clinical research, leveraging technology, would really be the biggest opportunity that I would have to make the impact that, could be potentially made. And so, yeah, I went out on a limb and started a company. And certainly there were many years where it was unclear, the impact that from outsiders that would generate. But I think our team really understood the potential. And that comes down to kind of some of the comments that have been made, which is when you think about, the human race and how really the number of people and the global, the global nature of our species, how do we provide access to healthcare without technology? How do we improve healthcare and outcomes without technology? It's a critical strategy to really making the impact we want to make. So our team at Medable is very passionate about the intersection of healthcare and technology, specifically how it can accelerate the development of therapies that will cure disease and alleviate human suffering. But yeah, in 2015, it was a big bet. I guess I was a believer that, like all of us here, that I could be a force for change and impact, and we continue to execute on that mission.
Well, I'm going to pick up on that and swing to Jeff at Vanderbilt. Jeff, to Michelle's point, when you stepped into Vanderbilt, I know that this great institution was going through a transition mode, and you had to jump in and analyze an entire system. And you came in with passion to really bring medicine to the people, each person. I'm curious, when you decide to take on the job, you're in it. What made you feel, you know what, we're going to be a world leader in innovation. I'm going to go out and bring innovation into Vanderbilt. I'm going to nurture it. I'm going to make that innovation meaningful to patients. I'm going to make it meaningful to the charge of having a stable, healthy medical system. I think it was Lisa who started us off with saying, you know what, when we look at the cost of care, we really have to look at the cost of sickness. And I think you balance that quite beautifully. Tell us, what was the secret?
Well, it sounds a lot better when you say it than how I was thinking of it at the time. But I think that the beauty of large academic medical centers is also part of our Achilles heel, in that, you know, there's, if you add it all up, maybe $100 billion a year of money flowing into this nation's academic medical centers for research. About half of that's from the NIH and about half of it's from industry and foundations. And nobody's anybody's boss. So academic medical centers are a little bit like a chaotic network of innovation happening all the time. So really the challenge isn't to create innovation in an academic medical center. That's in the DNA of academic medical centers. The challenge is, how do you harness it? And I had a long history in personalized medicine, which when I was younger and doing it, it wasn't called personalized medicine, it was called genomics. And what I began to realize as I had more and more roles in administration is that the concept of personalizing care, while a genomic issue in terms of understanding the DNA and getting all the therapies right, was also a quality issue, was also a population health issue. Because frankly, medicine and the care of patients, virtually none of it was designed around the patient. It was all designed around us, those of us delivering it. So I felt that what Vanderbilt could do is make that its focus. So not say, look, we're going to emphasize heart research, but we're not going to pay any attention to cancer. You really can't get away with that in a big academic medical center. And frankly, that's not productive. What we tried to do was say to everybody, let's focus, no matter what your disease or therapeutic or device interest in, whether it's in quality, whether it's in population health, whether it's in basic science, let's all harmonize that around the goal of personalizing care, making the patient at the center.
That's beautiful.
Tailoring the care for the individual. And let's make that our rallying cry.
So let's stick with that. Let's stick with that. Let me swing back to Lisa for a moment. Jeff, thank you for that, because your comments were almost summary comments for all of our panelists right now. And I know that the four of you have a great deal of respect and fondness for each other. And we feel that. We feel that. We thank you. So I want to stick with that personal tone that each of you have brought up. And Lisa, you have an outside-in view of the world. You've come into a great medical center, health system, deals with tremendous health disparities. And you're out there around the world scouting out for the best of innovation and bringing it back to Henry Ford. So I wanted to ask you, I think that the situation for entrepreneurs is overwhelming. They're trying to, first and foremost, perfect their idea, and they're trying to raise money. I think that they skip over something. And I want to ask you about that. Incubate or accelerate. If you were on the other side of the table, knowing what you know now, you're an entrepreneur, what path would you recommend for someone in our field who has a bold idea that you feel has worthwhile merit? What would you recommend as a next step in terms of interacting with your institution?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that it makes a big difference if you're in an incubator or an accelerator, because some of that really depends on what stage your company is in and whether you can actually gain entry into a accelerator. I think even more fundamental to the question is, you really, as a startup, need to understand the culture that you're trying to sell into. Healthcare is what it is, and our problems remain what they are because we're a really large, complex industry, and it's hard to make inroads in them. So often I see entrepreneurs who have failed to understand the culture. They are risk tolerant, they're all seeking bright futures, they have quick time horizons, they're all looking for that exit, and they don't appreciate that health systems such as mine we're slow, we're deliberate, we do lots of due diligence. Our horizon is more like decades, and we're really not driven by the company's milestones that have been put in place by their funding partner. So I think there's a lot of friction that develops because of that. We are risk averse, and I would suggest that companies trying to make inroads think about not just their technology and not just proving out the technology. When they come to me, I almost give them that. I almost assume that their technology is efficacious. But where we have problems is, how does it fit into our workflows? How does it fit into our existing care paths? Who do I need to train in order to use your technology? Where will it be stored? How will we dispose of it? So these are real life questions that need to be answered. Does it actually address some of our pain points? Very recently, this is a kind of a funny example, we were presented with a diagnostic that could look at a blood sample on the shelf and predict the freshness of it, so that blood that's more fresh could be used more efficaciously. So we took it to leadership. I thought it was kind of cool. So I took it to the head of my labs, and he said, oh, well, this is good, but I know fresh blood is better. My problem is that I can't get enough of it. So I don't need this technology. And so are you actually solving a problem that I have? The other one is theoretical cost savings. If you're bringing me a platform that will theoretically cost me money now, but give me theoretical cost savings in the future, you have to understand how I look at that and how my CFO will look at that. So there are lots of business related challenges that are involved in implementing new technologies, whether you're coming out of an incubator or an accelerator or just doing it on your own. And I think that really needs to be thought through, as well as the development of the actual technology itself.
Now, I'm going to say to our audience and to all the people who will see this video, package your statement, and that should be probably on the whiteboard of every innovator to really think through what you've just said. So I'm going to swing over to Eyal because, like you, he's in the system. He's looking at ideas. Eyal, just a reflection. I know that you and Sheba have really been at the forefront of integrating innovation into your system. I know ideas that you're championing, like MedAware, that look at drug-to-drug interactions. You've been a proponent of countless other ideas. I know companies like Datos were at the forefront during the COVID-19, and you've been a champion for all of these global ideas. If you were on the other side of the table, you weren't you were them. What would you be thinking about? I want to get into their head through you, because you've heard the stories again and again. Tell us, what do you think the innovator, the entrepreneur is thinking of when they're sitting across from you? And on the basis of that, what would you advise them as a next step to become part of ARC?
Right, it's a great question. When we built ARC, it was critical for us to foster an open innovation strategy. Jeff was mentioning this before, the traditional academic medical centers, and I mentioned before, I worked at the Harvard hospitals in Boston, as traditional as it gets, right? The traditional medical centers typically focus inwards. We're saying we have the brightest people on the planet working for us. They should be coming up with the intellectual property, and then we should be commercializing that and seeing the benefits coming out. So traditional academic medical centers, and Sheba was like that, are focusing inwards rather than looking outside. And we've tried to change that by fostering this open innovation strategy. And when we started ARC, I was saying, I want to be a startup friendly environment. I want to provide 360 degrees everything that a startup needs to get to the next level, to get into the market, to make a difference, to make sales, and so on and so on. And so what we're doing with ARC is, when we identify a startup company that has some potential as we see it, and we're looking for companies that we think will contribute value at the end of the day, that we think their innovation will play a critical role in the redesigned healthcare system of how we see it by the year 2030. When we see that product, and you mentioned a few of them, we bring them into ARC and we try to complement whatever is missing. It could be that they need an incubation because they're early on and they need a lot of guidance. So we have incubators at ARC. It could be that they need mostly funding. So we have venture capital at ARC. It could be that they need a network, an international ecosystem. So we take them out to the international partners. ARC has more than 100 international partners, like Henry Ford. So we would be sending out startup companies to Lisa. They would be evaluating them, and some of them will be implementing at Henry Ford. We're trying to see where we could complement the startup company. So we sit with each individual one. It's a network. We have a head of startups here that is sort of a psychologist for many of these startup companies to really find out where their needs are. Many times it will be around closing deals, right? That's what they're most interested in because that's where their pressure is coming from their investors. And we help them with that as well. But many times it's about going back to the basics and asking the basic questions of what my product should look like, who's the customer, and so on. So we try to provide all of that across the board.
That's a wow. I'm gonna pivot over to Michelle on your answer, because Michelle, I hope you don't mind going back to 2015 for a few moments. Today, of course, 2021, Medible's a force. Now you're sitting across the table of all the major biopharmaceutical companies in the world. If you're not, they soon will be knocking at your door. But 6 years ago, I imagine it was an idea. And you were bringing this idea forward. You were speaking to colleagues in industry. You were speaking to colleagues in academia. You've had incredible success as an entrepreneur, raising funds to really fuel the future of Medible. Would you mind going back to 2015, 2016, just a moment, and sort of recounting those early days of it's an idea, it's needed, I know it, I'm in the system, I see it all the time, and kind of knocking on doors to get the initial traction? What were the steps you took that led you to where you are today?
Sure. It's a great question, and something I probably don't think enough about. But I think Lisa's point was so strong, which is harnessing an understanding of how healthcare works is really important to solving the problem, and it's a very complicated system. So when I think back to really throughout my training, beginning at the University of New Mexico, through my training at Stanford, again, my observation was that patients need better access to the healthcare system, whether it's, to receive healthcare or to be a part of clinical research, which is one type of receiving healthcare. And, it was really through conversations with my colleagues, as well as my firsthand experience as a physician scientist, that I had, made kind of had the initial insights around what this could look like. Quickly as we got Medible kind of going and we began to have a platform where people could execute research, it was really the inspiration driven through how my peers imagined using and then later did use our platform in an academic setting that really, propelled the company forward in the very first years of the company. So I have colleagues, across Penn Medicine and Stanford and University of Oregon, who I think executed some of the most important and first digital research where patients were able to participate, in a decentralized fashion. So I think, academic medical research centers are such an important part of the equation for innovating in healthcare. And certainly our company in our inception and throughout our track, record and progress has harnessed that ecosystem to understand and then to inspire our work. So yeah, I think it's certainly an area that, as an entrepreneur and anyone who wants to innovate in this space, needs to develop those relationships with, so that you can develop that deep understanding of the problem to be solved from really all angles.
Taking your comments up, but before I pivot over to Jeff, I'm gonna just summarize what Lisa, Eyal, and you have just said, because I think it leads to where Jeff has been going with Vanderbilt as a national leader. Lisa really talked about know the system, know the system. Know the problem, know the system, and Eyal really exemplified what ARC is all about: accelerate, redesign, collaborate. And then you sort of carried the soccer ball, you kicked the ball toward the goal on that level, which is talking about your collaborations with all your colleagues around the nation in academic medicine and looking at the challenges of research. So you sort of like took an inside out, outside in view of the opportunity. Jeff, I want to ask you a question on this, because you inherited, again, one of the largest systems in the United States, facing the challenges of evolution, and recognized that you needed to incorporate innovation in order to make each patient who walks through the door at Vanderbilt recognize that you and your colleagues see them as unique. You see their challenges as unique. So you came in with an outsider point of view into Vanderbilt. You accepted the challenge, and then you were in the inside. So listening to what your colleagues have just said, how did you decide to make the moves that you did in terms of bringing innovation? I know, by the way, you're one of the great heart transplant centers in the United States. You have to pioneer all sorts of technologies to make that move swiftly through the system. There's a supply chain element to that as well, I know. Supply and moving it quickly so you don't waste tissue. What were the obstacles you faced, and how did you tear them apart? How did you make it happen in a system, as Lisa said, kind of resistant to change?
So, so thank you for that. I would say that while I landed in this role in 2009, I wasn't new to Vanderbilt. And that actually mattered a lot, in that before I was in this position, I was the chief research officer for the medical center. And so I kind of saw the medical center from an R&D perspective. And then before that, I ran the anesthesiology department and saw the medical center from a clinical perspective. And what I struggled with through my time in both of those roles is that the enterprise, even though an academic medical center, you would think everybody's talking to each other, right? Not exactly. And the research enterprise sits over here, and the clinical enterprise sits over here. And there are some folks like me that have a foot in both because they're physician scientists, but a lot of people kind of view it as fiefdoms, and they really weren't synergized. And so I think what I've really been trying to do throughout the time I was in the chief research officer role, and then even more as CEO, have been to really bring that together. So for example, our informatics enterprise is the largest in the country. The biomedical informatics department has over 100 faculty. At the time I became chief research officer, it had absolutely no meaningful relationship with the research enterprise. It was all health IT. And so we married those enterprises, and now we have BioVU, which is the largest single site DNA repository linked to a health record, right? So the power of what you can do in an academic medical center is entirely a function of how much you can roll the clinical enterprise and the research discovery innovation capability into one synergistic whole. That's the challenge. And every time we do that, we do something amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. You know, I'm gonna pop back to Michelle for a second and pick up on this. You know, Jeff has just really shared with us this insight of in a way, clarity of process leads to exceptional performance. And I know that you really, as a CEO, have looked at that exceptionally. By the way, I'm going to pivot to something that has been in the press about Medable. Congratulations to you. You really have enchanted the market in terms of their readiness to fund Medable, to fuel its success. You've brought aboard experts from Apple, Tesla. I mean, people who are really outside the box in looking at that's what Yael talks about, redesign of an industry that's had a certain pathway. So I want to ask you though, you know, raising capital is so much on the minds of the entrepreneur. You've been there again and again and again successfully, but I want to put that aside for a second. Aside from capital, what advice have you gotten and from where in order to create the enterprise? Because that's what I know Lisa and Eyal and Jeff are trying to do. They're trying to accelerate innovation. They're trying to help people like you get to where you are today as a force of change. So aside from the money, I mean, we understand that you were successful, very successful in doing that. Aside from that, what advice did you get, and where were the best places where you got that advice?
Sure. I mean, I think, you know, just to kind of provide some context, there were so many years where there was no money. So that's an important, you know, thing to realize and then really we weren't successful in raising scaled venture capital until we had pretty significant evidence of our impact and, you know, the strength of the business. But I think, you know, something that's really important is something I think to dispel is that physicians aren't good business people. I fundamentally disagree with this kind of broadly held perspective. And I say that because one of the things, you know, across entrepreneurship that I think makes amazing companies amazing is when people are able to bring their whole selves into the problem to be solved. And so when you look at healthcare, I'm just a big believer that whether you're a physician or you're a researcher, whatever it is that your knowledge base is and who you are as a person, you know, your passion for that is one of the biggest assets you can bring to a company and to a startup. So, you know, I think one of the early pieces of advice and something my mentors continue to encourage me on is, you know, I am a qualified leader of this company, even though I don't have a business background, because, you know, I have a vision for where this should go. And I say that because, you know, I think every entrepreneur, you know, has some subset of skills that they haven't yet had direct experience in. You have a subset of skills that also you're a deep expert in. And so I guess, you know, the advice that I would have is, you know, really continue to grow and build those skill sets, but also that are newer. But also really believe that that expertise you have and the understanding from the healthcare system, whether you're a researcher or a scientist or a doctor, is a really key driver of, you know, the potential for your company, and embrace that and build from there in the broader set of skills.
Thank you. Thank you. And no, Eyal, listening to Michelle, I have a sense that you would most certainly agree with her in terms of physicians can make exceptional business leaders. Michelle is an exceptional business leader. You're an exceptional business leader. So I want to ask you a question right now that pivots from what Michelle just shared. The need to really serve as a sounding board for innovation. You're traveling the world. You're building ARC innovation centers around the world. And when you look at the sort of advice that you need to offer up, or you and your team need to offer up to entrepreneurs like Michelle, obviously Medible's at a very different place today. What do you think of? How do you orchestrate that? And what's your philosophy about not just the seed money or the capital, and I know you do that, but that direct advice that you provide?
Well, there's a lot, but I think one thing which is sort of overarching, and we're seeing a lot, you know, one of the problems with young entrepreneurs is that we many times we get we fall in love with our idea. You know, we think it's the best idea ever, and it's very, very difficult to for others to come out and point, you know, weaknesses. That's a problem. I think you know, as an advice for entrepreneurs, I would say, you know, always ask why not. You know, I have this great idea, but why? You know, what are some of the reasons it wouldn't work? And try to address each one of those reasons. Try to understand where your weaknesses are and strengthen those weaknesses. Try to hear different perspectives. You know, always be open to change. One of the other things we're seeing that comes from this is that, you know, an entrepreneur comes up with a great idea up front, raises money, has a great direction, but then with time starts skewing off. They go in other directions. You know, they get influenced by different parties they meet along the way. And people say, like, sometimes investors, you know, will invest, but if you'll do this instead of where you're going. And then, you know, their great idea that they started with starts going to the offside and, you know, ends up crashing. So, you know, you have to always be open. You have to hear criticism. You have to address criticism, and you have to make those decisions and stay on course. That's why you need strong partners that can help you. And don't fear. You know, some entrepreneurs, they're always, you know, they're saying, you know, this is mine. You know, I don't want to open it. I don't want to share. I'm afraid somebody's going to take ownership. Somebody's going to take this away from me. Try to find the right partners to work with so that you could get a direct access to the market, somebody that can mentor you in where the market needs are. And I think that is a recipe for a successful company.
Thank you for that. You know, having been on the private equity side myself and sat with boards, I think that your advice, again, should be one of those business books, which is once you get clarity of idea and you vetted it out, stick with it. Don't change it up every 2 seconds. Wise words. Thank you very much. Lisa, one of the questions I think in listening to this conversation, I almost feel that innovators are from Venus and sort of like incubators, accelerators, private equity are from Mars. That whole sense of like the feelings about your ideas and then the harsh reality of listening to proven advice from within the system. And again, you're sitting there inside Henry Ford Health System. It's one of the best in the nation. It's a global system. It is historic. What is it? I think it's more than 100 years old easily in terms of serving Michiganders and the world now through your efforts. So I wanted to ask you, I wanted to pretend you're sitting with some of your portfolio companies as you would, and this concept of nurture or nature, sort of like be empathic or blunt, as it were. And certainly from having been on the private equity side, I know that as nurturing as I am, we tended to be more blunt. So I wanted to ask you about that mix as someone who rolls up their sleeves. What do you do to course correct entrepreneurs in the field?
Yeah, I would say that we're definitely nurturers. Our clinicians are scientists at heart, and they like to take apart the problem. They like to work with the teams to create new solutions, and they really like to iterate with design and value. So we like to nurture. Maybe we nurture too much, and as Eyal said, we might be one of those advisors that take a project off track. I hope not, but our mentors tend to be the clinicians, and they really like to get their hands dirty. Our technologies are usually years from adoption. So we know that as they grow, they'll work with venture funds and PEs and others to scale those technologies. And then, like you said, that will be a lot more about being focused and just driving implementation, if you will. But I want to go back to something that Jeff had mentioned, which is that even within the healthcare environment that he found as a leader, there were resources that lived in silos, and he had to bring them together in order to really sort of push innovation. I think that's a very important lesson for outsiders to know as well, that within a healthcare system, the mentorship, the knowledge, it lives in silos. And as young companies look for healthcare mentors to help them, you really want to be in a mindset of who can help me navigate this incredibly siloed and complex system and get me in front of the right resource, the right data set, the right owner of that data set at the right time, so that I can have the appropriate subject matter expertise coming out of the system that I really need.
Yeah. I'm glad you referred to Jeff, because I want to actually swing back to Jeff on that. I know that our health system is very fragmented, and within a health system, it's very fragmented. And Jeff, to Lisa's point, you came in and just acknowledged it's very fragmented, it's very siloed. So looking at your role as a researcher, as an industry leader, as a scientist, and obviously looking at the relation of this to that, when you look at the landscape of health innovation and the number of systems and technologies now in development, what do you think is lacking in the US health system? I mean, would you mind giving us the perspective from your chair as CEO of Vanderbilt, if you were to say, hey, the next thing that's on my radar screen is fill in the blank?
Yeah. Well, I think, especially just having been through this pandemic and seeing all the reasons why nobody thought digital healthcare was going to work or happen fast, happen in a week. I think that we are headed toward a massive digitization of the healthcare economy. And it needed to happen. And now some of the barriers and some of the resistance have been overcome. And now patients are, so I like actually the telehealth visit. You know, the healthcare systems were like, oh, well, our patients might not like that. They might want to see the doctor. Well, you know what? It turns out most of the time they were perfectly happy to telehealth with us. So I think some of that slowness is going to succumb to healthcare systems partnered with the innovators on this in this symposium that are willing to move that faster, and they will drive the market, right? And the public's already ready. Public's like, I wanted this yesterday, give it to me. The other aspect of this, if you go back to Eyal and the quality discussion, you know, just take one thing in healthcare: patients taking their medications. We know that in the United States, at least, 50% of the time, patients don't take their medications as prescribed. Half the time. Well, that's a solvable problem. You know, we still don't have patients getting reminders about when to take their medications and how often to take them and did you take them, and you know, whereas Target still contacts me about what I should buy next week. So we are so far behind where we should be in just sort of basic opportunities to do what Michelle has done with clinical research around the entire healthcare encounter. Really make healthcare part of the everyday life of a person. And I think Medable is an example of how to put the patient at the center around the vertical of clinical investigation. But if you think about what that is, basically it's just making it easy for people to do that. Why can't we just do that with all of healthcare? I think that's where it's going.
Hey, Michelle, I think that Jeff just wrote your next television commercial. Is he gonna star in that? You know, by the way, none of our panelists have been paid or exchanged compensation with each other. I
promise.
but I think that they have great fondness and respect for each other. And Jeff, those are very well chosen comments. Thank you very much. Now, Michelle, you're dealing with a health system, an innovation system, drug development, that has gone on the same way, sort of, probably for 30 years. And now you're coming in and you're not disrupting, you're bringing it to another level. You're taking technologies that we're using elsewhere in the world, and you're saying, you know what, the consumer, and we're always people first and then patients second. The consumer, as Jeff just said, gets emails from Target, they get reminders here. Why don't we treat people with health concerns as customers? What could you share with us from your magic toolbox? One or two things that Medable is going to bring to the forefront that we should be looking for?
Sure. I mean, you know, it is surprising in a sense how surprising it has been, the effective, you know, digitization that we've seen. I think when you look at, say, for example, you know, I think back of Sears Roebuck and versus Amazon, you know, and people walked into Sears Roebuck and big box stores to buy things for years, you know, and then Amazon came along and enabled access that was extremely convenient and, to Jeff's point, personalized. And, you know, there's really no difference, I think, in the future of healthcare. Healthcare will be accessed largely through the internet, and it will be highly personalized. And I think the result will be, you know, better outcomes, because we do know that one of the biggest barriers to, you know, the best outcomes is access, and then the effective adherence, you know, with the guidance provided. I think also there's a big opportunity to establish, you know, new and updated best practices as people engage more and we have more diversity represented within that engagement. So I think some of the things to look at from our company are this ubiquitous access, you know, the way that Amazon disrupted the Sears Roebucks of the world, the way that, you know, that can lend to personalization and ideally more motivation for engagement and ultimately better outcomes and consumers who are happier with what they're being provided.
Thank you. Thank you. Eyal, without sharing any secrets, I mean, Michelle has been kind enough to sort of say, hey, here's where we're going. Here's where the market's going. expect us to be with the market. AI, you've had that sort of feeling when we had coffee and listening to you. Would you mind, without sharing any secrets or proprietary secrets, what's the next big surprise that's coming out of ARC and Sheba? Would you mind sharing in terms of not the name of a company or a name of a company you're nurturing, but maybe one or two of the next big ideas that you're going to put on the table for the world to see?
Well, we're, we have a couple of interesting focus areas currently. I don't know if I mentioned this to you over the coffee, but we just launched 2 weeks ago the ARC Space Lab. I didn't imagine we'd be doing this when we started ARC. Space was the last thing we were thinking about, but considering some of the issues that space travel will come up with in the next few years, now that space is undergoing this huge revolution with the private companies, telemedicine for people in space is going to become a huge thing. So, can we utilize some of the technologies coming out of Israel, really unique solutions in telehealth, also for space travel, looking 5 to 10 years down the road? I think that's going to be critical. That's another collaboration we have with Henry Ford, by the way. And so that's one thing. And then AI, we're doing a lot of work with AI. Some groundbreaking solutions have came out of Sheba, like a company called ADOC, for example, which revolutionized how we're doing radiology. So we have a couple of these companies coming out, digital pathology, multi-omics, looking at all the spectrum from the genomics all the way to digital footprints, which is another omic level as we see it. So I think what we're going to be seeing is a lot of data-driven tools, and the junction between telehealth and data coming from remote sensing and so on. That's going to be a key issue that ARC is going to be very active in.
So Lisa, we began with you. We're going to end with you, and then share our audience poll. It's hard to believe that our time together has sort of zoomed by. My counsel to Galion is make these conversations at least an hour and 15 minutes, but an hour will have to suffice. Lisa, you have really championed innovation, and you've also championed collaboration. And Eyal just mentioned that, of course, the collaboration that you have with Sheba. Could you just sort of reflect a few moments and share with us as a summary comment, what traps should entrepreneurs avoid? What's the biggest potholes that you see? Would you name 3 of them for us, please?
Well, I've got so many. I do this presentation called The Top 10 Reasons Why My Hospital Won't Adopt Your Technology. So I have a whole list of them. But again, what I really come down to is, I guess, 1, think about how the implementation of this will work, and really dig into whether or not it can work with our technology infrastructure. Will it work with our EMR? Are you suggesting that we have new logins for our patients? Is it going to work with our cybersecurity protocols? Really think about the integration. So that would be the one pitfall that we have. 2, a lot of entrepreneurs, I think, are just very frustrated with how long things take. And I agree, things take really long in healthcare, but we are where we are because it's taken us 100 years to get here, and it's going to take us a long time to get out of it. So be patient with us, understand that we're trying to make decisions for the next 20 years while you're trying to get through your next milestone. So just be on the same page with us. And then the third thing I would say is that a lot of startups really do overpromise and underdeliver, and it's a big market out there. We see literally hundreds of ideas every year, and we're tired. We're tired of seeing companies that say they can solve the entire population health problem if we only adopt their platform. And just sort of don't overpromise, understand what you can do and what you can't do, and we'll work with you on it. So those would be 3 things that I would offer.
Fantastic conversation, everyone. I am so grateful to the 4 of you. Your contributions to health innovation that can sustain and save lives or extraordinary. It really comes with championing bold ideas. So Lisa, Eyal, Michelle, Jeff, thank you so very much for participating in the Gallion Foundation webinar that really talks about the acceleration of innovation that can improve the human condition. I thank you so very much for spending this hour with us. Before we close, I just invite our Gallion Foundation staff to post the results of our panel, our poll. Thank you. Well, I think, Lisa, you would agree that there's some honing to some extent of the idea, certainly to improve care. I think that all of us can reflect on these results, reflect on the conversation. I think we're all here to make a difference in the world. To the Gallion Foundation, to our audience, to Secretary General Bruno Cohen, thank you so very much for participating in this conversation. Be well, be healthy. Let's make a difference. Bye now.